In Racing Through Time, we look at the drivers, the teams, the circuits, and the races that made motorsport history. The Nürburgring isn't known for a particular race, unlike Le Mans, Indianapolis, or Monaco. The Nürburgring is famous because it's the most challenging circuit ever built. Tucked away in the Eifel Mountains in western Germany is a racing circuit that is longer, more dramatic and more difficult to master than any other. A project this size would never be undertaken these days. There is no circuit comparable to Germany's Nürburgring. The corner names are etched into racing folklore, for example the Karussell and Flugplatz, or flying place. Raymond Mays said, "I went to bed wondering how I'd ever learn it." Mike Hawthorne said, "I'm told there are 172 corners, but I didn't stop to count them." 2 purpose-built circuits were constructed. The 22.81 kilometre Nordschleife, or North Loop, and the rarely used 7.8 kilometre Südschleife, or South Loop. District Councillor of the rural Eifel district, Dr. Kreutz, and Herr Fuchs, Supreme President of the Rhineland, laid the foundation stone in 1925 when 3,000 workers began construction. The circuit was initiated as a means of alleviating unemployment in the nearby Koblenz and Colin region. The scale of this project has been unmatched since. The track looped around the Nürburg castle, providing a challenge with steep drops, trees and banks to trap the unwary driver. Apart from the circuit, spectator facilities were beyond anything previously presented. Away from the grandstand, it's a place where thousands of spectators brave the rain and fog, frequent hazards, to watch motor racing in the area. Marshalling on the circuit was a major undertaking. It was one of the first circuits to have a proper telephone communications system around the full 22 kilometres. This great test for drivers and cars was used extensively by the German motor industry in the 20s and 30s. It's still used today, and for a fee, you can drive on it too. There's a special feeling about going to the Nürburgring, camping in the forest overnight, the air of expectancy as the transporters make their way from the villages that surround the circuit. Adenau is known as the village close to the circuit where people take a break from the action at the track and enjoy some of the countryside in the Eifel Mountains. Great names of motor racing have won there. Pre-war, Caracciola, Rosemeyer and Seaman. Post-war, Ascari, Fangio, Moss, Brabham, Stewart and Hunt. Some of the most dramatic moments in motor racing history surround you at the Nürburgring. That history began with the first car race on June the 19th, 1927. It was won by Rudolf Caracciola in a Mercedes 680. Both names destined to play an important part in racing. Later that year, the German Grand Prix was won by Otto Merz in a Mercedes 680 from Werner and Walb. In the heatwave of 1928, Caracciola and Werner won the German Grand Prix in the Mercedes-Benz. It was the first of many German Grand Prix wins at the Nürburgring for Caracciola. In 1929, Louis Chiron won. Mercedes driver turned team manager Alfred Neubauer directs operations. In the 1930s, Mercedes withdrew from racing for economic reasons, and Caracciola drove the Alfa P3 in 1932. The Silver Arrows began their quest towards victory in 1934 as Germany rose as a political and industrial power, and Mercedes and Auto Union began a technological and racing battle. The 1934 German Grand Prix. While German drivers were promoted, Italy's Luigi Fagioli was brought into the Mercedes team to drive alongside Caracciola. Mercedes and Auto Union had spent millions of Reichsmarks making their new cars. Dr. Porsche had designed the mid-engined P-Wagen Auto Union. Hans Stuck, on the left, watches carefully as the car is prepared for the race. Stuck went on to victory in the German Grand Prix, the first race of the new 750kg formula. Fagioli was second and Chiron third in an Alfa. In 1935, Bernd Rosemeyer was driving for Auto Union. The former motorcycle racer had no preconceptions as to how a Grand Prix car should handle, and he took to the rear-engined car immediately. This is the Eifel-Rennen, one of the major races of the era, and Rosemeyer won easily. Meanwhile, in the 1935 German Grand Prix, there was a surprise defeat for the favourites. The whale, the supercharger, the understeer and oversteer, Italy's Tazio Nuvolari could drift his cart-sprung Alfa like no one else. Rebuffed from joining Auto Union, Nuvolari in the Alfa P3 monoposto kept the pressure on Mercedes driver Manfred von Brautich. On the last lap, the Mercedes burst a tyre, and Nuvolari won the race in front of 300,000 shocked racegoers. 1936 was Auto Union's year. In the German Grand Prix, Louis Chiron had a serious accident, almost being scalped. In the pouring rain, even Caracciola's brilliance couldn't head off the rising star of German motor racing, Bernd Rosemeyer. One positive to emerge from Mercedes-Benz's poor year in 1936 was up-and-coming driver Hermann Lang. With the decline of Achille Varzi through ill health, Bernd Rosemeyer carried the flag for Auto Union. He held off the entire Mercedes team in the fog and rain for which the circuit is notorious. A soaked Rosemeyer is greeted by his mother and father at the end of the 1936 German Grand Prix. He also won the European Championship that year. For 1937, Mercedes-Benz was back with a W125. Few improvements were made to the Auto Union for 37, and once again Rosemeyer found himself fighting in a battle all on his own. The 1937 German Grand Prix saw these powerful cars at their peak in the final year of the 750kg formula. Aristocrat Manfred von Brautich, former mechanic Hermann Lang and Bernd Rosemeyer started fastest. During the race, British driver Richard Seaman and the German Ernst von Delius clashed, sending von Delius to his death. Often it was a question of whose tyres lasted and who could take care of them the best, which determined the winner. Sliding the car through the carousel, 600 horsepower and narrow tyres. Nuvolari leaps back into the Alfa and back into the race. The handkerchiefs wave for race leader Rudolf Caracciola. Caracciola won the German Grand Prix with Von Brautic second and Lang third in a Mercedes clean sweep. Mercedes technical director Rudolf Uhlenhuth at the wheel of the experimental Mercedes two-stage supercharged Grand Prix car in 1938. Uhlenhuth talks to Neubauer, the stars of the 1930s. The reputation of the Ring was forged in the era of the 12-cylinder Mercedes and the 16-cylinder Auto Unions. AP Fane sits at the wheel of his Fraser-Nash BMW prior to the start of the sports car race at the German Grand Prix in 1938. Emerging car company BMW were making a name for themselves with their impressive 2-litre 6-cylinder sports car. Fane drove the BMW to victory. For the Grand Prix, Auto Union had lost Bernd Rosemeyer in the speed record attempt, but gained Tazio Nuvolari in the new D-Type. Von Brautic had been fastest in practice from Lang and Seaman, with Caracciola and Nuvolari on the second row. From the start, Lang, Nuvolari, Seaman, Caracciola and Hasse were the top 5 cars, followed by Von Brautic. Richard Seaman was soon up to second place as the cars slithered around the circuit in long, power-sliding drifts. Nuvolari left the road and Mercedes were first, second, third and fourth, with Caracciola dropping back. Pit stops and Seaman in with number 16 Mercedes, McIntosh sheeting down the back to shield him from the fuel. A quick drink, clean the aero screen, an anxious glance behind and he's back in the race. Lang's car was giving trouble and Caracciola had problems of his own. He was feeling unwell. Von Brautic was using all his skill to stay ahead of Seaman, opposite lock through the bends. Lang passed over his troublesome car to a reserve driver and took over from Caracciola. Rudy explains that he's feeling ill. As the battle continues, Nuvolari prepares to take over another Auto Union. Driver swaps were a part of racing until the late 1950s. H.P. Müller gives up his car to Nuvolari. The little Italian is back in the race, but out front it's Von Brautic and Seaman first and second. Team manager Alfred Neubauer waits, and in come the cars for their second pit stop. Von Brautic takes his drink, off comes the toweling, the car's ready to go. Seaman too prepares as the car is refueled. Suddenly there's pandemonium in the pits. A flashback and Von Brautic's car catches fire. A mechanic rolls to put out the flames and Neubauer helps with the flag. Meanwhile, Seaman is almost forgotten until he's waved out of the pits and into the lead of the German Grand Prix. With the fire put out and the foam wiped off, Von Brautic climbs back behind the wheel of the Mercedes. A hesitant start, and Von Brautic is back into the race. He returned with just the steering wheel, having crashed his Mercedes 5 kilometers after the pits. pounding that the drivers took on the circuit is easy to see as Seaman comes up to the checkered flag. Seaman becomes the first British driver to win a Grand Prix since Sir Henry Seagrave in the 1920s. Hermann Lang was spectacularly fast in the Eifel Rennen of 1939, winning the race after nearest challenger Seaman retired on lap 1. Lang's lap record lasted until 1956. By the time the German Grand Prix came around, Seaman had lost his life in the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa. In the race, there were typically mixed weather conditions and the unexpected happened. Battling it out with Lang and von Brautich was the Maserati of Paul Pietsch. Von Brautich and Lang had problems in the Mercedes. The French De La Haye's weren't quick enough, and the Auto Unions were not able to get it right either. In the wet weather, everyone's eyes were on Rudolf Caracciola, the most successful driver of the era. On board with Hermann Lang at the wheel of the Mercedes. This wet race was the last great win for Rudolf Caracciola. Second was Muller and Pietsch was third, while Hermann Lang was European champion. It was the last time that Auto Union and Mercedes-Benz fought it out for honours in the German Grand Prix. 11 years were to pass before motor racing returned to the Nürburgring. The circuit was bombed and needed reconstruction before racing could restart. Alfred Neubauer returned to the ring to watch Alberto Ascari take on the local drivers in the 1950 German Grand Prix. This wasn't a World Championship race, but a Formula 2 event. Among the stars of the past were Paul Pietsch, Manfred von Brautich, Hermann Lang, Hans Stuck, and on the second row, Karl Kling. Von Brautich started at the back of the field. Stuck and Lang were quick, but both of them fell out of the race with mechanical problems in their modest cars, and Paul Pietsch was as high as fourth. Ferrari were dominant, with Alberto Ascari leading André Simon's Gordini. Ascari wins in the V12 2-litre Ferrari. In the following year, 1951, Formula 1 cars returned to the ring. It was a battle royale with Pietsch at the wheel of an Alfa Romeo providing the drama when he crashed early in the race. Behind, the race between Ascari, Gonzalez, Fangio and Farina continued. The reign of the 158 Alfa Romeo was about to come to an end. Ascari came out of the pits to defeat the Alfa Romeo team and Fangio to win the 1951 German Grand Prix. In 1952, Formula 2 had taken over and replaced the 1.5-litre supercharged and 4.5-litre unsupercharged cars for Grand Prix races. Supporting the Grand Prix were two sports car races. Ferdinand Porsche, designer of the Auto Union P-Wagen and the Volkswagen, began producing sports cars under his own name after the war. By 1952, Porsche made up half the grid for the small capacity sports car races. One of their rivals, EMW from East Germany. Everyone was waiting, however, for the battle between two men in the second sports car race for bigger capacity cars. All eyes were on Mercedes making its return to competition, and two drivers, pre-war star Hermann Lang and post-war contender Karl Kling. At the front it was Lang and Kling, with Mercedes coupe bodies cut down into open cars. French opposition came from Gordini. There was a special determination about the driving of Hermann Lang. Kling didn't give up easily, leading for a number of laps. Because the layout of the track doubled back on itself just after the pits, team managers were able to pass on up-to-date lap times to the drivers. However, on this occasion, Neubauer decided that pit signals were superfluous. A Ferrari spun out, and the spectators watched as the Mercedes fought it out around the circuit. Understeer to oversteer, using every centimetre of the road, the two charged around the track. Lang fought off the challenge from Carl Kling to take victory for the final time. In the 1952 German Grand Prix, a fine performance during practice by Paul Piech was not reflected in the race. A spin by Felice Benetto's Maserati caused both Piech and Maurice Trintignant to take evasive action. Alberto Ascari knew that his Ferrari teammate Nino Farina was going to be his strongest opposition. There was no doubt that the four-cylinder 2-litre Ferrari was the car to beat in Grand Prix racing. The HWMs and the Gordinis had trouble keeping up, and even Taruffi's Ferrari wilted under the strain of the pace set by Alberto Ascari. Robert Mazon's Gordini had been in fourth place until a wheel fell off. Felice Benetto looks on anxiously as Ascari flicks the Ferrari through the last corner to take victory on his way to winning the World Championship. Behind him, a trio of Ferraris, Farina, Fischer and Taruffi. Farina just avoids being run over in the paddock for the 1953 Grand Prix. Stirling Moss tries the Cooper. Ascari steps out of the Ferrari. Moss's car had been built in just a few days. It featured an Alta engine and nitromethane fuel, giving it almost as much power as the Maseratis and Ferraris. The question was, how long could it last? And it would need many fuel stops. Recovered from his 1952 accident, Juan Manuel Fangio was anxious to get back to winning. Britain's Mike Hawthorne was on the front row with Ascari, Fangio and Farina. Neubauer inspects the cars at the start. First of the British cars to qualify was Roy Salvadori's Connaught. Fangio is concentrating and Mike Hawthorne finds time for a quick drink just before the start. Here, Fangio takes the lead. McAlpine's Connaught in midfield. Side by side, the battle between Ferrari and Maserati for supremacy. All seemed to be going well for Alberto Ascari. Hawthorne was fighting it out with the Maseratis. Ascari, Hawthorne, Fangio and Farina the order until Ascari lost a wheel at 200 kilometers an hour. The Italian showed some rare temper in the pits as the mechanics struggled to find a replacement wheel. Hawthorne and the Ferrari led Fangio's Maserati. Now it was Nino Farina's turn to fight his way back into the lead, with Ascari returning after a long delay. Hawthorne dropped to third, and Farina in charge with Fangio tucked up in second place. Ascari in the pits once more with an engine problem. Luigi Villaresi is called in and Alberto takes over from his friend. Back in the race, Ascari breaks the lap record and gets as high as 4th. However, after 3 hours, the race is over with Nino Farina the winner from Fangio and Hawthorn. The 1950 world champion took a welcome victory. He'd been overshadowed by the recent performances of Ascari and Fangio. In 1954, Mercedes were back with their new Grand Prix cars, and pre-war ace Hermann Lang joined Fangio, Karl Kling and Hans Hermann. It was a last-minute rush to get all 4 cars ready, especially as they featured open bodies. There was a Mercedes parade before the start. Young Argentinian Onofre Maramon had been killed in practice, and naturally the South American drivers were upset. Fangio in pole position in the Mercedes. Hawthorn was next to him, and Stirling Moss in the works-assisted Maserati on the front row. An unhappy Ascari was not driving, the Lancia not ready. Hermann and Gonzalez on the second row. Mike Hawthorn was hoping to go well from the middle of the front row in the Ferrari. Karl Kling had discovered a problem, a leaking fuel tank. Hans Hermann was looking calm. At the start, the streamlined Mercedes of Hans Hermann was well up. Gonzalez came through to lead Fangio, Moss, Lang, Hermann and Hawthorn. Fangio caught Gonzalez and took over in the W196. Moss was third, followed by Lang and Hermann, with Hawthorn and Beira. Lang was driving superbly, but the car was trailing smoke. Rushing up through the field and closing fast was Karl Kling. Lang passed Gonzalez and Kling lapped in 9 minutes and 59 seconds. Kling began to close on Lang. As far as Mercedes was concerned, Kling was anxious to win, regardless of instructions. What they hadn't realized was that Kling had a leaking fuel tank and was anxious to build up his lead before the pit stop. He sped past Lang, who unfortunately spun out and stalled his car. It's likely that the engine was the problem. Fangio now led from Karl Kling, who tells us about his race.
Ich habe ja immer, wenn ich an Stadt und Ziel vorbeigekommen bin, habe ich immer gedeutet, dass ich was habe.
Every time when I passed the start and finish line, I was always pointing with my finger to the seal at the back, but they didn't understand. Mr. Neubauer was aware of the situation, that there must be something, otherwise I wouldn't have pointed like that. So I thought, well, I have to drive faster. So I overtook Fangio, and the commissioners of Mercedes-Benz said, "Stop, don't overtake Fangio." Normally, the petrol would have been enough to do the 500 kilometers, but as I was losing fuel, I had to drive faster to make it. I was trying to make up some time so that I could make a pit stop and refuel. Near the end of the race, part of the car broke, the wire that goes to the back axle. That is why the back axle was not stable anymore, so I only finished in 4th place. It was a lot of hassle. Vast crowds lined the circuit during major races of the era. Gonzalez was so upset at Onofre Maramon's death, he retired from the race. Mike Hawthorne took over Gonzalez's car. It was an easy win for Juan Manuel Fangio ahead of Mike Hawthorne in the Ferrari. Fangio went on to win the World Championship. There was no German Grand Prix in 1955 in the aftermath of the Le Mans tragedy, but in 1956 the Grand Prix returned. Fangio, now with Ferrari, headed Peter Collins, Eugenio Castellotti and Stirling Moss. At the start, Salvadori's privately owned Maserati was well up amongst the front runners in 6th place. Peter Collins' challenge ended when he retired. Moss desperately tried to catch Fangio, but to no avail. British privateer Bruce Halford drove a superb race, up to 4th at one point. Peter Collins' car was pushed away. Fangio won from Moss, with Jean Beira third. A defeat at the hands of Fangio was acceptable even to Stirling Moss. The next year, Juan Manuel Fangio won a classic race in a Maserati 250F. Historic racing expert Willie Green talks about the car and the driver.
I mean, in his motor racing, he never went faster than he needed to. But when he wanted to go quickly, you got a problem, because he was going to really try. I mean, his race at the Grand Prix at Nürburgring in '57, when he was so fast, was quite extraordinary. I mean, I've driven that actual car around that circuit, but in the modern version of the circuit, when you've got runoff areas and Armco, in those days it was hedge to hedge, and you either knew the circuit or you didn't, and one mistake and you were history. And he was going so fast. I mean, that I think stands out, along with Nuvolare's drive in the Alfa when he beat the Mercedes, as being two of the greatest drives in history.
The basic design of the 250F was now in its 4th year. Moss had joined Van Wall and won the British Grand Prix. Collins and Hawthorne were at the wheel of Lancia Ferraris, modified versions of the previous year's Lancia D50s. Fangio had started on a light load of fuel, hoping that the suspension would last better. When he came into the pits, the fuel stop appeared leisurely. He even jumped out for a drink. The wheels were changed, and Fangio gets back in. A steady drive out of the pits. In front on the bumpy circuit, Hawthorne and Collins were having their own race, unaware that Fangio was making a charge. It looked a forlorn task, but lap after lap he closed on the duo up ahead. Collins had a clutch problem and couldn't change gear. Hawthorne was leading, and Collins tried all he knew to stay ahead of Fangio. Fangio closed the gap, put 2 wheels on the grass, up came some dust and stones, and Collins dropped back to 3rd with broken goggles. Now it was Hawthorne's turn to feel the pressure. These two had fought it out in the 1953 French Grand Prix, but in this race, not even Hawthorne could do anything about Juan Manuel Fangio. The Argentinian went on to win the German Grand Prix, establish a record lap, and win his 5th World Championship. Lotus and Ferrari driver Cliff Allison.
Well, the Nürburgring to me is the greatest track that's ever been. There are 83 corners and they're all different. It goes up and down, and it's very similar actually to a lot of the roads in the Lake District. And that's why I liked it a lot. And Graham Hill and I went over there and we spent 2 weeks learning the circuit and wore out 2 private cars doing it. And despite the help from Stirling Moss, we still managed to learn it pretty effectively. Stirling, when we first arrived, said, "Oh, I'll show you the way around, lads," you know, and so we had a little Ford Anglia, and we spent more time on 1 wheel than 2, and learnt absolutely nothing from Stirling.
Well, a lot of drivers tended to send each other up at that time.
Oh yes, yes. It was much more jovial then. Yes, it was great fun.
However, the German Grand Prix of 1958 was a tragic race. After a difficult season with Ferrari, Peter Collins had won the British Grand Prix and was confident at the Nürburgring. Van Wall's Tony Brooks remembers.
I think it was only perhaps a couple of miles before the straight when all of a sudden Peter disappeared from my rearview mirror. And of course I didn't know what had happened. I thought you know, he'd perhaps had engine trouble, some mechanical trouble of some sort. And it wasn't until you know, after the race that I knew that he'd had an accident, and you know, unfortunately it ultimately proved fatal. So you know, that was a very, very you know, sad event, and of course took away the satisfaction of possibly my best race ever, the German Grand Prix, because it was such a challenging circuit, and it you know, it was just a very satisfying race until I you know, found out about Peter.
This wasn't the first victory that Brooks had had at the Nürburgring. He'd shared the winning Aston Martin in a 1,000-kilometre sports car race with Stirling Moss in 1957.
The Nürburgring, 1,000 kilometres, that is the real test of a car's road holding, of a car's performance, and of a driver. So I think they're both, you know, great challenges in a way, but you know, I think, you know, poles apart really. And as I said earlier, 14.5 miles round, 173 corners of all sorts, you know, dipping and diving, weaving and so on. I mean, really incredible test of a car. And you know, the DBR1 there was absolutely superb, although it was substantially down on power compared with the opposition.
The ADAC 1,000-kilometre race was first run in 1951 and became an important fixture on the racing calendar. In the late 1950s, Aston Martin, Jaguar, Porsche, Maserati and Ferrari were the front runners. The Aston Martin DBR1 virtually made the Nürburgring its own. They won the race on 3 occasions, Brooks with Moss in 57, Moss with Jack Brabham in 58, and then Moss with Jack Fairman in 1959. The Nürburgring was always a driver's circuit, and it was said that if you could win at Nürburgring, you could win on any track. It was the supreme test of a driver's skill. The German Grand Prix was not held at the ring in 1959 and 1960, but returned in 1961. The winner, Stirling Moss. The versatile English driver explained that if you have less power, you have to try to use it 100% of the time. The less you have, the more opportunity it gives the better driver to demonstrate his skills over a lesser driver. But if you corner too hard, you scrub off speed.
And therefore, if you are able to feel the car through the corner a bit faster than another guy without scrubbing it off, obviously it will help. And I was very lucky in as much as that both the races that I happened to win, both Monaco and the Ring, in principle are race circuits where the slower car can be closer to a faster car than on the fast circuits, obviously so. And luckily there were 2 very important events for my career, really.
The 1962 race was run in wet conditions, and it was a scrap between Dan Gurney's Porsche, Jim Clark's Lotus, John Surtees' Lola, and Graham Hill's BRM. This was the year of Graham Hill's World Championship. He won from Surtees and Gurney, with Clark in 4th. sports cars, Ford took their GT40 to the Nürburgring with Phil Hill as the driver for its debut in the 1963 1,000-kilometre race. Hill broadsides away from the start. The car didn't last, but it did show its speed. Jim Hall's Chaparral from the USA in the 1966 race. This was an innovative car and it helped internationalize sports car racing in the 1960s. Phil Hill, the winner, in the Chevrolet-powered car.
Oh, I like the Nürburgring, always the old, long Nürburgring. That was just that was the granddaddy of all racetracks, and extremely rewarding. I was the first guy under 9 minutes around there. In that, we lost 40% of our engine size, and I can't remember how many seconds off the lap record, and was the first person to get under 9 minutes. So that tells you a lot about what kind of a circuit it is.
I mean, how much of it was actually learning the circuit, and how much of it was just the fact it was a great racetrack to drive?
Well, it was over 14 miles around, so of course it was more difficult to learn, but of course it did have identifiable aspects to every different piece of it. It wasn't like the Solitude, for example, which had a wiggly section about 9 kilometers long. I think it was maybe 5 kilometers long, I can't remember, but at any rate, they were all the same, and a place like that is very difficult. Whereas the Nürburgring, you actually knew it was possible to learn it and to almost take a photograph of anywhere on those 14 miles and say, that is about 100 yards before such and such turn. And, you know, you could really know exactly where you were at and deal with it as a different place.
John Surtees won the German Grand Prix in 1963 and 64, and Jim Clark won in 1965. With the coming of the 1966 3-litre formula, Jack Brabham showed that his cars were the ones to beat. In difficult conditions, he saw off much more powerful machinery to win the race, heading home John Surtees. In 1967, the Lotus 49 DFV was there, flying over the umps. Jim Clark at his best, but neither his car nor Graham Hill's lasted the race. Watch the angles that the cars assume here. 1967 world champion, New Zealander Denny Hulme doubled up for Repco Brabham. A foggy, wet race the following year saw a magnificent performance from Jackie Stewart in the Matra Ford. On a circuit he disliked, the Scot won by 4 minutes from Graham Hill in the Lotus and Jochen Rindt in the Brabham. The great sports racing cars of the early 1970s raced at the ring, Porsche versus Ferrari and Alfa Romeo. Racing into the 1970s with increased cornering speed and wide, slick tyres, some modifications had to be made to the track. 1974 and Ferrari's Niki Lauda and teammate Clay Regazzoni. (1974), the win to Clay Regazzoni from Jody Scheckter and Carlos Reutemann. The Brabhams of Carlos Reutemann and Carlos Pache. The impetuous new talent Jody Scheckter in the Tyrrell. The ring was becoming very difficult for modern Grand Prix cars. There were places where they left the ground. Driver safety and marshalling were becoming more difficult to achieve on such a long track. drama for Niki Lauda as he pits with a flat tyre. Carlos Reutemann won in 1975 from Jacques Lafitte and Niki Lauda. 1976 saw the end of an era for the Nürburgring. This was the last Grand Prix on the Nordschleife after Niki Lauda's fiery crash. With the changing attitudes to safety, it was clear that the ring would have to change. James Hunt went on to win the last German Grand Prix to be held at the old Nürburgring. Niki Lauda, recovering from his injuries, made a brave fight for the championship, coming back and driving at Monza, but James Hunt won the 1976 title. The ring was finished as far as Formula One was concerned, but it continued to be used for saloon and sports car races. The featured cars were now BMWs, Porsches and Opels. The drivers who loved the challenge could still race there. Ronnie Peterson, Dieter Quester, Jochen Niersbach, Brian Redman, Jackie Ickx and Jochen Maas, to name just a few. Stirling Moss talks to Hans Hermann. Juan Manuel Fangio, Carl Kling and Hermann Lang. The legends of the track head out for a lap of the old circuit. After many delays and financial difficulties, the new Nürburgring was opened on May the 12th, 1984, with an all-Mercedes race won by Ayrton Senna. Now, the so-called new Nürburgring has 20 years of its own history, with the old Nürburg castle brooding in the background. The German, Luxembourg and European Grand Prix have been held here. Germany has sustained 2 Grand Prix each year, due to BMW and Mercedes participation and German drivers' recent success. Toyota used the expanded facility as they prepared for their introduction to Grand Prix racing. Always popular is the truck racing Grand Prix, as thousands of truck racing fans descend on the track. Touring and sports cars have the annual 24-hour race to compete in, using the full circuit. German touring cars have competed on both long and short circuits. On the 75th anniversary of the Nürburgring in 2002, a statue was unveiled to remember Juan Manuel Fangio's famous drive in 1957. McLaren Mercedes driver David Coulthard appreciates the history of both Mercedes and the Nürburgring.
Absolutely, I think that Mercedes-Benz's contribution to motorsport is there for everyone to see. So for us to come here to the Nürburgring 75 years after this circuit was founded is I think a big achievement for Mercedes-Benz and motorsport. I'm very proud to be part of that current programme as a Mercedes-Benz driver, and I have been for well over 100 Grand Prix. So you can't help but feel the history. I'm standing here beside one of I think it's 1934 car, and that's just incredible.
Memories created at the Nürburgring endure through these films and stories. They are truly races through time.